It was an enormous strategic risk for the United States, not halfway around the world, not in another continent, but in...
For years, a government right next door was operating less like a country and more like a drug enterprise. Violent groups, cocaine money, and instability. This wasn't overseas, it was in our neighborhood. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explains to the Senate.
You had basically three of our primary opponents in the world operating from our hemisphere from that spot. It was also a place where you had a narco-trafficking regime that openly cooperated with the FARC and the ELN and other drug trafficking organizations using their national territory. It was an enormous strategic risk for the United States, not halfway around the world, not in another continent, but in the hemisphere in which we all live. And it was having dramatic impacts on us, but also on Colombia and on the Caribbean basin and all sorts of other places. It was an untenable situation and it had to be addressed. And it was addressed. And now the question becomes what happens moving forward. As I've described to you in previous settings and in individual conversations, we had three objectives here. The final, I'll work it backwards because the end state here is we want to reach a phase of transition where we are left with a friendly, stable, prosperous Venezuela and democratic, in which all elements of society are represented in free and fair elections. By the way, you can have elections. You can have elections all day. But if the opposition has no access to the media, if opposition candidates are routinely dismissed and unable to be on the ballot because the government, those aren't free and fair elections. That's the end state that we want. Free, fair, prosperous, and friendly Venezuela. We're not going to get there in 3 weeks. It's going to take some time. And so objective number one was stability. In the aftermath of the removal of Maduro, the concern was what happens in Venezuela? Is there civil war? Do the different factions start going at each other? Are 1 million people crossing the border into Colombia?
The priority was simple: stop chaos, prevent civil war, and avoid a mass refugee crisis. Stability mattered. But stability isn't the finish line. The real goal is a democratic Venezuela with elections that actually count. And in Washington, eventually, is a very convenient timeline. Now here's the whiplash. While policymakers lecture the world about democracy, clarity at home is disappearing. Because in the nation's capital, under Mayor Muriel Bowser, a basic biological reality somehow became a riddle. What is a birthing person? This next video explains how language meant to include everyone somehow managed to confuse almost everyone.